Hello, and welcome to the second part of the chapter Climb Not, which is the third of our reading sessions. Just to have a little recap before we jump back into it where we left off. Have a think about these questions and pause the video if you want to see if you can answer them. Who is our protagonist? What have the warning signs about the tree been to him? And where is he now? So you can pause it if you want now. Our protagonist is Joseph. Protagonist means the main character in the story. And while Edgar is the person who is hearing the story being told by his Uncle Montague, this story told by Uncle Montague is about Joseph. The warning signs from the tree have been several. He's had Jess, his dog, sniff the hole at the bottom of the tree, and she went kind of mad and ran off, and they never saw her again. There was the warning, the ancient climb not warning carved into the tree, and the gardener who said you should listen to that. He said heed it. And there's also a fresh climb not carved into the tree the week after Joseph has climbed up to this point, where there wasn't one before. And currently in our story, Joseph is sitting high up in the tree, about 30 feet, thinking about are there any footholds that he can get up there. And he's being motivated by the writing to climb even higher because he thinks it's Mr. Farlow, the gardener, who's carved it in there to try and scare him and stop him from going on it. I'm just going to recap some of the vocabulary that we haven't yet come across. So we haven't come across brooch, which was the fancy badge made of gold or jewels. Prizing, which is the verb which means working something free or wriggling something out that's stuck. A grappling hook, which is one of those things you throw at a building or a ship or something that sticks in because it's very sharp and you can use it to climb up. Inexorably means something happening that is impossible to stop, often something quite disastrous. Rendering means creating an image, particularly in your mind. Reverie is your thoughts or your dreams, and divergence is a separation or moving away, and they will be highlighted in red as I read. And I'm thinking today, when I read, about predicting where the scares are coming, but because we've already thought about that a little bit, I was thinking about what is going to happen to Joseph. So what do I think might happen to him? He's perched at the top of this tree at the minute, and wondering what will happen. How is this story going to get more scary? I'll share that with you now. And we continue here where Joseph was thinking about what had Mr. Farlow used to carve into the tree the sign "Climb Not." Whatever he had used, it was certainly sharp, for the scratches were deep and the wood was as hard as stone. Joseph saw that if he could crouch on the branch he was sitting on, he might be able to reach a branch that would then support him enough to stand and continue the climb. It was a precarious manoeuvre, and had he slipped, a broken arm would be the least he might expect, and the resulting fall to the ground far below. But Joseph managed to ease himself up onto the branch, and, sure enough, he could reach out and grab a smaller branch above and pull himself up safely to a standing position. From here, the route suddenly seemed straightforward, and Joseph climbed with ape-like ease, hauling himself from branch to branch, with barely a pause to see where his next foothold would be. In no time at all, he was pulling himself up to sit astride the very last set of branches that formed a kind of basket or crow's nest high up at the top of the tree. Joseph whooped with triumph and gazed out at the view, out across the pasture towards the tiled rooftop of his house, which he now looked down upon. Looking to the west, he could see over the hedge to the fields and woods beyond, and was able to discern very clearly the regular bumps and hollows that formed the imprint of a deserted village. The buildings were long gone, their ghostly outlines could be detected through the blanket of soil and grass. He could even see now that the pasture, too, had markings in it. There were round markings every now and then, and, stranger still, what seemed to be the remains of a pathway leading directly to the tree itself. Then a flock of jackdaws croaked by, and Joseph was fascinated to find himself almost level with them. As they passed, Joseph looked up and saw something he had not noticed before. Above him, the tree died away, ending in a jagged stump, as if it had once been even taller, and in this highest part of the tree, embedded in the bark, were dozens and dozens of small metal objects. Joseph stood up, his curiosity completely overpowering any fear he may have felt at the tremendous height. He stared in amazement at the treasure trove before him. Hammered into the bark were crosses of silver and gold, bracelets distorted by the effort of forcing them into the wood, coins, rings, and pendants from necklaces, brooches, and buckles. Even Joseph could see that many, if not most, of these items were of great antiquity and must be valuable. A gold brooch caught Joseph's eye. He reached out and grabbed it, giving it a tentative tug. It shifted a little. It had certainly been hammered in with quite some force, but with a bit of persuasion, it would come free. As he began to work it loose, he thought he heard a noise at the base of the tree and stopped. There were so many branches between him and the ground that he could not see anything but small patches of grass showing through the gaps in the leaves. He thought of shouting hello, but did not want to alert anyone to his presence. If his mother caught him up here, he would never hear the end of it, and, after all, he could not see them. They could not see him. He returned to prizing the brooch free, and after a few seconds he had it in the palm of his hand. This time there could be no doubt. Joseph distinctly heard a low moan, as if some kind of animal were at the foot of the tree, but no kind of animal he recognized, unless a bear had escaped from a nearby zoo. Then it occurred to him it might be Jess, that she might be badly hurt, and moaning with the exertion of having dragged herself back. "Jess," he called, "is that you, girl?" But it was not Jess. Whatever was making the noise was no longer at the foot of the tree, but had begun to climb it. He could hear the sound of something thudding into the bark, and then dragging itself up, as if a soldier was scaling the tree using grappling hooks. He saw with mounting nervousness that the branches below him were shaking as whatever it was approached. Joseph wondered if it was old Mr. Farlow trying to frighten him, but even as he clung to this feeble straw of hope, the thing swished into view. He could not make out any features on the black shadow that was climbing faster and faster towards him, save for the huge curved claws that it used to grip the bark. The scream that Joseph made flew across the open pasture and crashed through the garden wall and house wall and shattered the chattering peace of his mother's coffee morning. His mother instinctively ran towards the pasture with her friends in tow. They found Joseph's body at the base of the tree, together with the branch he had been sitting on. Joseph had a number of deep scratches on his legs and back, caused, they supposed, by the fall, and curiously, his precious watch was missing. No amount of searching beneath the tree would uncover it. "Elms will drop their branches without warning," said Mr. Farlow, shaking his head when he heard the news. "I did warn the boy not to climb." But Joseph's father decided to take vengeance on the tree he blamed for his son's death, and demanded that Mr. Farlow find someone who would cut the tree down. The old man shook his head. "Not I, sir," he said, "and if I were you, I'd leave the tree be." There was something in the way the old man said the words that seemed to end the discussion, and no tree surgeon was ever found. Instead, it was estate agents who were contacted, and the house was put on the market once more. They moved before the house was sold. Joseph's mother could not sleep there. The rustling of the great tree played on her nerves. Mr. Farlow was kept on by them to maintain the grounds until a buyer was found. At the very top of the tree, light would occasionally twinkle as it played across the dented back of a watch embedded in the highest reaches of its ancient trunk. "More tea, Edgar?" said my uncle, lurching forward rather alarmingly. "Yes, please," I said. My throat did feel somewhat dry. I was finding it difficult to shake off the thought of being trapped at the top of that great tree with some nameless horror climbing inexorably closer and closer. My imagination had been horribly effective in its rendering of those murderous claws. Uncle Montague refilled my cup and his own. He placed his saucer on his knee with one hand and lifted the cup to his lips with the other. When he had taken a sip, he put the cup and saucer back on the tray and got to his feet. "Perhaps I should not be telling you such tales, Edgar," he said, walking to the window and peering out. "I do not wish to give you nightmares." "That is quite all right, uncle," I said. "I promise you I was not so very frightened." "Really?" said Uncle Montague, turning around with a crooked grin. "My tale was not frightening enough for you?" "No, uncle," I said, putting my cup down with a rattle. "That is to say, I mean—" "Calm yourself, Edgar," said Uncle Montague, turning back to the window. "I was teasing you a little. Forgive me." "Of course," I said with a smile. "I realise that." Uncle Montague chuckled to himself, but said nothing more. He seemed lost in a kind of reverie, gazing out through the windows to the garden. I looked about me. The dancing fire flames were producing a not especially pleasant illusion of animation among the objects around the room, and the shadows they cast. The shadow under my uncle's chair seemed particularly to have a life of its own, and gave the unsettling impression that something was squatting beneath it, twitching, and ready to dash out like a great spider across the room. Though I knew, of course, that it could not be. The framed prints and paintings, the objects on the mantelpiece and on the cabinets, the books and the furniture, they all seemed to be trembling in anticipation, as if alive. Uncle Montague turned and picked something up from the top of a cabinet nearby. The movement of the contents of the study seemed to come to a sudden halt. When he turned back to face me, I could just make out it was a tiny doll with a china head and a fabric body. My uncle walked over and handed me the doll with a degree of seriousness utterly at odds with the object, although I could see that it was made with unusual care. Still, it seemed an odd sort of thing for my uncle to have in his house. I felt a little foolish holding it, and thought of the ribbing I would get at school should anyone there have seen me. "Have you ever been to a séance, Edgar?" asked my uncle, a seemingly wild divergence from the doll he had so gravely placed in my hands. He sat slowly down in his chair. "No, sir," I replied. "But you are aware of such things?" "Yes, sir," I said. "People try to contact their departed loved ones. There are, I believe, those who claim to be able to allow spirits to speak through them." "Mediums," said Uncle Montague, sitting down once more. "Mediums, yes," I added. "You said claim, Edgar," said Uncle Montague. "You are sceptical, then?" "I have heard tell that there are those who say they have such powers, but who are fakers and conjurers, uncle. I do not think it possible to speak to the dead." Uncle Montague smiled and nodded, tapping the ends of his fingers together and sinking back into the shadows. "There was a time I would have shared your view," he said, looking back to the window. I followed his gaze and thought I heard running footsteps outside on the gravel path by the window. Surely, I thought, the village boys would not dare to enter my uncle's garden. My uncle had either not heard the noise or was untroubled by it, because he leaned towards me, smiling. "I have a story on that subject that may interest you, Edgar," he said. "Perhaps it will change your opinion." "Really, uncle?" I said, still feeling a little self-conscious, holding the tiny doll. "Please tell it then, sir." "Very well, Edgar," he said. "Very well." And that is the end of that chapter. And I just wonder what you were thinking was going to happen to Edgar when the story, not Edgar, what was going to happen to Joseph in that story. And I think I knew that there was some sort of horrible creature when we saw the claw marks, but when he's found the jewelry and the brooches and the golden things hammered into the wood at the top of the tree, I knew there was some exchange of jewelry for souls, because I remembered about the watch Joseph had been given, and I thought that he'd gone too far when he started to take out the brooch, and we all knew that something bad was going to happen, although I didn't expect him to be killed by the beast with the hooked claws. That certainly sent a shiver down my spine. And that's the end of today's session, and next week I'll start a new story that it seems to be something to do with the doll that Edgar is holding, in Uncle Montague's living room, and perhaps something to do with a seance, which was something to do with contacting the dead. So I'm sure you can all think of other examples of stories that have creepy dolls and possessed toys in them, and we can start predicting what that sort of story might be about, ready for next week.